Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. In 2024, I'm sure many of you listening, as well as myself, have felt a deep sense of uncertainty for the future, with imagery and video from conflicts across the globe being fed to us on a daily basis by mainstream media and social media, as well as escalating tensions between the West and the East. It's only natural to be apprehensive and doubtful of the future. As of right now, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the horrific situation in Gaza have been occupying news columns and have been at the forefront of discussion. However, despite the two aforementioned conflicts receiving round-the-clock coverage, other conflicts across the world are largely ignored and brushed to the side. Whether that be the war in Sudan, the ongoing tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as a whole host of others. One such conflict that falls into this category would be the ongoing situation in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Myanmar has been experiencing significant political uncertainty and turmoil following the military coup that took place on the 1st of February 2021. The military, known as the Tatmadaw, seized power from the civilian government led by Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, or the NLD, alleging widespread fraud in the November 2020 general elections, which the NLD won by a landslide. Since the coup, there have been widespread protests and civil disobedience movements across the country, with citizens demanding the restoration of democracy and the release of detained political leaders, including Aung San Suu Kyi. The military junta has responded with violent crackdowns, resulting in numerous deaths, injuries, and arrests. The situation in Myanmar remains tense and unstable to this day, with ongoing resistance from various sectors of society, including civil society groups, ethnic minority organisations, and pro-democracy activists. The international community has condemned the military's actions and imposed targeted sanctions on military leaders and entities associated with the junta, but efforts to resolve the crisis through diplomatic means have so far been largely ineffective. The military have been heavily criticised for human rights violations, with accusations of torture, extrajudicial murders, as well as rape being levied at the military. In fact, some incidents of such barbaric behaviour has even been filmed, highlighting the brazen nature of the violence that the military are carrying out against its peoples. It highlights that they are above the law. In fact, they are the law. Aside from military brutality, various rebel groups have also been accused of terror tactics, not only against military, but also against other minority groups. Religious tension has also plagued the country for a number of years. Religious tension in Myanmar has been a long-standing issue, particularly between the Buddhist majority and minority Muslim communities, notably the Rohingya population. The Rohingya, predominantly a Muslim ethnic background in the Rakhine state of western Myanmar, have faced persecution and discrimination for decades. The Rohingya have been denied citizenship and subjected to various forms of human rights abuses, including restrictions on movement, access to education and healthcare, and violence. This persecution escalated dramatically in 2017 when the Myanmar military launched a brutal crackdown in response to attacks by the Rohingya militants. The military's actions forced hundreds of thousands of Rohingya to flee to neighbouring Bangladesh, leading to one of the fastest growing refugee crises in recent history. With all of the tension in the country, from political uncertainty, a military dictatorship, to sectarianism, naturally, the country has produced a shed-load of violence content. Many such videos having gone under the radar, not attracting any real mainstream coverage. In today's video, we will cover 3 graphic clips from Myanmar released in recent months, which perfectly demonstrate the chaos currently going down in the country. But nevertheless, let's take a dark journey into the carnage and evil currently going down in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Number 1. Human barbecue. In regards to the first clip in question, I can show very little, if any, imagery due to the graphic nature of the video. The clip itself is 3 minutes and 14 seconds in length, and the backstory, as is for the rest of the clips on this video, is murky to say the least. Some comments suggest that the victims involved may have been local thieves, though I cannot find any concrete confirmation of this, and even if they were, a punishment involving such extreme torture followed by death certainly doesn't fit the crime. The perpetrators behind the incident are alleged to be members of the military. It certainly gives off the vibe of a mob justice type incident, as in the background you see multiple villagers looking on without expressing any real sorrow or terror. In fact, they are cheering on and encouraging the incident. The video involves a type of torture and death that gets to me the most, which is burning alive. But to make matters worse, the victims in the video are essentially slow cooked. As you play the clip in question, you are met with the sight of utter barbarism right away. You see 2 men who are hogtied, and they are hanging from a tree via a chain. The chain being the optimal instrument to use in such an incident, ensuring that the victims are held above the intense heat. Beneath the victims is a pile of wood that has been ignited. The men dangle from the chains in the hog-tie position directly above the fire, but in a way so that the tips of the flames are touching the victims. They are not completely engulfed in flames by design, basically to prolong the men's suffering. It's hard to see initially, but one of the men is actually closer to the flames than the other. One is hung higher up. As you play the video, for a couple of seconds you see a still image of both victims. In the image, you see that they have been beaten up. One is covered in blood, and they have been tied up using metal chains. You are then greeted with the horrific visual of both men hanging above the fire, and the cameraman is filming close enough, ensuring that you see the men's facial reactions as they burn. The men grimace and hack up lumps of spit and mucus as the hot air and smoke fills their lungs. As mentioned, one of the men is closer to the fire, and the flames are essentially engulfing his entire chest. The men don't scream, though you hear them let out continuous groans. Men, who appear to be wearing military fatigue, then throw dry grass and small sticks on the fire, causing it to flare, making the flames climb higher so that they engulf the second man, who is hanging higher. As this happens, the military men as well as the crowd cheer. As the fire burns, you see chunks of the victims' clothes fall off as they burn. At this point, the flames have engulfed the victim who is hanging higher. His chest and face are in the flames. He tries his best to wriggle and distance himself from the fire, but he can't due to the hog tie. He just continues to hang in the fire as it burns away his clothes. You then start to see both victims' skin blister and tear due to the intense heat. When skin burns, blisters and tears, it reveals what looks like white flesh or white meat. It's hard to explain. The man, hanging lower to the fire, appears to pass out. However, the second man remains conscious somehow for much longer. All while he is still engulfed in flames, you hear him spit and cough due to the smoke inhalation. The man keeps trying to move, but after a period of time, his movements begin to get progressively slower. A man then throws flammable liquid on the fire, which makes the fire blaze furiously. After a few seconds, the second man appears to pass out or die. His body seizes up and begins to almost contract. The military men and the crowd continue to look on. Some could even be heard laughing as they watched the men burn to death. The video is incredibly hard to explain, but incredibly graphic. You see chunks of flesh melt away from the victim as the fire burns through their clothes. The sounds of the victims' pain-filled groans, as well as them hacking up lumps of phlegm, is truly horrifying. I myself am particularly sensitive to these type of videos. It was a very hard watch. The clip itself came out in February of 2024. Number 2. Hack and Slash. This video, which I had no idea what else to title, is an extremely violent clip that is a total of 5 minutes in length. The killings are said to have been perpetrated by a rebel group, and the victims in the video are, from what I've read, either government sympathizers or are possibly linked to a separate rebel group or political movement. The video is shot during the dead of night in what appears to be the outskirts of a town or village. As you play the video, you see that there are 2 victims. One is sitting on the bed of a parked pickup truck with his hands tied behind his back, while the other is surrounded by rebels dressed in military fatigue. They wrestle with the man and manhandle him towards the edge of a bridge. They also kick and strike him in the process. The man does his best to stay away from the edge of the bridge, but his captors overpower him. He screams and begs for mercy to no avail. The men get the victim towards the edge of the bridge and they lift him up, seemingly as if they are going to throw the man off the bridge. It's a steep drop. However, instead, the men just dangle the man over the bridge. He lets out horrific screams which echo into the night. A couple of men at this point can also be seen holding large combat knives. If you've seen the infamous Dagestan massacre video, the blades look similar. After a while, they pull the man back over from the bridge ledge and then lay him on the concrete ground. A man then stands on his back, while another takes the combat knife and attempts to slice around the back and side of the victim's neck. As this is happening, the victim is talking to his eventual killer. The man grimaces and the knife-wielding psycho attempts to cut his throat. However, the blade is so blunt, not much actually happens. At this point, the man with the knife takes the blade and lines it up against the back of the victim's neck. And then, a man walks into the camera shot and stamps onto the blade several times. You hear a horrific crunching sound as the blade seemingly cuts through the man's spine and throat. It appears to instantly kill the victim. However, the rebel makes sure, by maniacally hacking away with the knife while shouting angrily at the now deceased victim. After each strike, blood sprays onto the concrete pavement. At this point, the second man is taken out of the pickup truck and then dumped on the ground next to the first victim, and the second victim's ordeal lasts much longer. Immediately after being thrown out of the truck, one of the rebels takes his combat knife and then strikes the victim multiple times on the back of the neck. Immediately, he bleeds profusely. There is much more blood than the first victim. The victim has his mouth gagged, so it's hard for him to scream, though you hear him grunt as he is struck with the blade. Another man then enters the fray, once again holding a combat knife. He takes the blade and essentially plunges the knife into the victim's lower neck, basically just above the shoulder blades. They then turn the victim over so that he is now laying on his back. This time, one of the rebels takes the knife and begins to hack away at the throat of the victim. The sounds are horrific. The blade makes wet thudding sounds as it hits the man's throat, and after a few strikes, the man lets out a pain-filled wail which is combined with the sound of bubbling blood which is collecting in his throat and mouth. A second attacker then takes his combat knife and plunges it deep into the victim's stomach. The victim then rolls over in pain into the fetal position. Following this, he then continues to have his throat cut by one of the rebels. It takes several minutes for the second victim to pass away due to the blunt nature of the blades. The remaining couple of minutes in the video essentially show the men going back and forth, hacking away at each of the victims' necks, trying to decapitate them. though the blades they are using are so blunt they can't complete the decapitations. Out of frustration, one of the rebels pulls out a revolver and shoots one of the deceased victims in the head at point blank range. You see brain matter fly from the impact. The video is what I would describe as frenzied. In a few segments, one of the men swinging the blade can be heard audibly screaming in anger as he puts all his strength into trying to decapitate the man. This leads me to believe that these killings were more than likely personal. Number 3. Free Burma Ranger. This clip is actually a slightly older one, which I believe to have been released in either 2020 or 2021. The video has some text throughout, which gives us some clues in regards to the motive behind this savage murder. The video itself isn't all that long, at 2 minutes and 8 seconds in length, though it is very graphic. The video itself appears to have been shot in a jungle-type location, and it was filmed during the middle of the night. As you play the video, you are met with the sight of a shirtless captive on the ground. His hands have been tied behind his back, and his eyes appear to have been covered with tape. At the beginning of the video, you are also met with the sight of one of the killers. He smirks at the camera as he stands over the victim. A caption then appears on screen stating, "A member of the Free Burma Rangers," which I believe is referring to the victim. The Free Burma Rangers are a Christian multinational humanitarian aid and advocacy organisation. There are multiple men surrounding the victim, and one says to make him suffer. A man with a serrated combat knife then lightly stabs the victim in the back. It pierces the skin, but doesn't go all that deep. They make the victim stand for a few seconds before making him sit down again. The man with the knife then repeatedly stabs the man all over his back multiple times, but he deliberately doesn't stab deep enough to penetrate organs. The man's back slowly begins to become masked with blood. They then kick the man several times before one of the killers poses for the camera, sticking his tongue out. The victim barely makes a sound throughout all of this, only a couple of groans when he is kicked. The killer with the knife then slices deep into the man's tricep, so deep that it appears that you see the white of his humerus bone. Because of the lacerations and puncture wounds, the victim is a bloody mess at this point. They then lay him on his back, before the killer places the blade on the victim's windpipe. By the way, the blade itself is ridiculously sharp. He mocks the victim before then slicing back and forth with the serrated knife. He cuts the victim's throat all the way down to the spine incredibly quickly, and the amount of blood that is spraying from the laceration is absolutely insane. The gash in the man's throat is so deep that he's basically been half decapitated. However, you still see his chest move as he tries to breathe. I believe this is called paradoxical breathing. His chest expands and contracts rapidly. The killer spots this and then stabs the man in his chest. A second killer then enters the fray. He takes a small knife and then repeatedly stabs the man in his abdominal area as well as in the bladder area. I'd estimate that he stabs the man around 20 times or so. The men responsible then take turns posing for the camera. One holds up his hands to the camera, showcasing the blood on his palms. The cameraman then pans back to the victim, and at this point, a shirtless man wearing a headlamp appears to be attempting to cut the man's stomach open. This is where the video ends. But anyway, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it, if you can enjoy this sort of content. Also, anybody from Burma, or Myanmar, as it's now called, if you could elaborate on the situation currently ongoing in the comments, that would be much appreciated. I have done some research into the topic, but anybody who is on the ground or knows people living there has connections with Myanmar, if you could fill us in, that would be much appreciated. The more context we have, the better, because ultimately this isn't a story that is really being covered by mainstream media, despite the brutality currently ongoing in the country. Anyway, thank you guys for the support in recent times, it's been much appreciated. Also, I apologise for my last video. There was a slight sound discrepancy on that video. I have actually re-uploaded it to Twitter, so you guys can see it there with the sound adjusted if you're interested. The link to my Twitter will be in the pinned comment, as will the link to my Twitch, and the link to my Patreon. So if you guys are interested, please check those out. It would mean a lot if you follow me on Twitch. We have a good time over there. But anyway, again, thank you guys for the support. And as always, stay safe. And I'll catch you on the next one.